May the Spirit of the Lord, who anointed Jesus at his baptism, so anoint you this day.
18 months after anointing the king, Justin Welby asked him for his gracious permission to resign. The first Archbishop of Canterbury in Church of England history to be forced out, he confirmed his departure on X. Justin Welby wrote,
"The Macon Review has exposed the long-maintained conspiracy of silence about the heinous abuses of John Smyth. When I was informed in 2013 and told that police had been notified, I believed wrongly that an appropriate resolution would follow. It is very clear that I must take personal and institutional responsibility for the long and re-traumatising period between 2013 and 2024.
Friends of the Archbishop of Canterbury said he'd been spending a lot of time praying in the last few days, trying to work out what the right thing to do was. An aide said there were a lot of tears in Lambeth Palace today and that people didn't want it to end like this.
I think he's made this decision because he believes it's the right thing to do, and doing the right thing is always the right thing. But he mustn't be the scapegoat for this. He's exercising his leadership as the one who takes responsibility, which sometimes happens in all walks of life, that the person who is the leader takes responsibility for the failings of the whole organisation.
Smyth's victims told us tonight they felt this was just the start of the church facing up to its legacy of abuse.
This is a fifth of my life I have spent campaigning to get the truth out on what happened and to bring Smyth to justice. We failed on that, but now some more of the truth is in the public domain.
You see today then as the start of a journey really to justice.
The stupidity of this is if Justin had handled this differently back in 2017, if he'd put out a statement saying, "I'm sorry, I got to Lambeth, my eye was off the ball, do you want to meet me tomorrow, victims? Are you all right? Have you got counselling? I am sorry," then we would have ticked him off the list and forgiven him there and then.
7 years ago, Channel 4 News revealed the details of brutal beatings by Smyth in 3 separate countries. The church ordered former Social Services Director Keith Macon to carry out a review. Published last week, it accused the church of a cover-up and Justin Welby himself of failing to do enough to stop the abuse. Yet last week, the Archbishop had this to say.
"I've given it a lot of thought. I've taken advice as recently as this morning from senior colleagues. And no, I'm not going to resign for this."
That prompted fury from his opponents in the church and the victims themselves.
The comment that really upset us as survivors was when he said, "I am not going to resign for this." There was something about the way he said "for this" that almost implied to us that he was trivializing and minimalizing the extent of our sufferings.
If we'd let something like that go for 4 years, I'm afraid any local clergyman, any local church leader, they would be out in their ear, they'd be disciplined. And so the question we're asking is, if that applies to the rest of the clergy, why doesn't it apply to others? Why doesn't it apply to Justin?
One victim we're calling Graham played a crucial part in the Archbishop's demise. Graham reported his own abuse to the church in 2012. That culminated in Justin Welby himself being informed the following year that the Bishop of Ely had written to his counterpart in Cape Town detailing the seriousness of Smyth's horrific activities.
Many people had full detail of the abuse and did not disclose to the police what they knew in the various stages of investigation. He was not handed over to the police in '82, and in 12-13, after I came forward, when it was quite clear criminal offences had taken place, the contacts with the police were not followed up as they should have been.
In an interview with me last week here at Lambeth Palace, Justin Welby accepted what he called his own really shaming failure to do enough to stop John Smyth's abuse. Smyth would go on to abuse boys and young men in South Africa until his death in 2018. But the cover-up by the church actually began much earlier still, back in the 1980s. 16-year-old Guy Naituru was found dead in a swimming pool at a Christian holiday camp led by Smyth, who was later charged with culpable homicide. The case unravelled. Last week, the Macon Review revealed shocking details about Smyth's summer camps in Zimbabwe, with reports of regular abuse by John Smyth, including beating with table tennis bat, enforced nudity, naked swimming and showering. He also gave regular lectures about masturbation and slept in dormitory area with boys. Yet the abuse in Zimbabwe could have been stopped if a secret report by a vicar in Britain in 1982, 10 years before Guy died, had been acted on.
I think they did let everyone in Africa, because had it been stopped, these abuses and the death of my brother could have been avoided.
Nearly 30 years after Guy's tragic death, Justin Welby wrote to his family apologising.
I decided not to tell my mom because it was just like opening up the old wounds. How I took it myself, I was a bit disappointed because knowing that in year 2013, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, knew about the abuses which were done in England.
What do you think about his resignation today?
That's what I'm saying. I think it has been long overdue. If you are in the church, people look upon you to say you are people who say the truth.
Justin Welby maintains that though he exchanged Christmas cards with Smyth in the 1980s and 1990s and even gave money to Smyth's ministry in Zimbabwe, he didn't know of the abuse until 2013. But the Macon Review makes clear that several bishops and senior church leaders did know long before then. Justin Welby hasn't said when he'll go, but replacing him won't be easy. Victims of decades of church abuse are calling for root and branch reform. So whoever does become Archbishop of Canterbury may find uneasy lies the head that wears the mitre.
Morning, Fred. Morning, everyone.
Well, within the last few minutes, we've received a statement from the Bishop of Lincoln, Stephen Conway, who was named and criticised in the Macon Review. When he was the Bishop of Ely back in 2013, that's when he heard the allegations. Tonight, he said, during my tenure as the Bishop of Ely, I received a disclosure about John Smyth. Once it became clear that there was an international dimension which directly affected another province of the Anglican Communion, I made a detailed disclosure to Lambeth Palace and contacted the relevant diocese in South Africa to alert them to the issue. It was my understanding that this matter was reported to the police in Cambridgeshire and duly passed on to the police in Hampshire, where the abuse had occurred. I am clear that I did all within my authority as a Bishop of the Church of England, bearing in mind that I had no authority over an entirely independent province on another continent. I acknowledge fully that my fault was in not rigorously pursuing Lambeth about that province-to-province communication, and for this I am deeply sorry. Well, the Bishop of Dover, Rose Hudson-Wilkin, joins me from Canterbury now. Good evening to you, Bishop Rose. I wondered if you could tell me whether you think that Justin Welby made the right decision today.
It is difficult to say whether he made the right decision, because I want to begin by saying how shocked and saddened I am at the level of abuse that took place and the lack of response then. I am sure that we would have seen something completely different were that to have happened today. I am certain of that. Our Archbishop decided, having weighed everything up, that it was right for him to resign, and I must accept that he has come to that decision.
It sounds like you're not wholly clear that he should have resigned, given that there were many failings by many people.
There were many failings, indeed, by many people. I think what you hear me saying really is that resignation, having his resignation or indeed any other resignation, is not going to resolve the problem. It is not going to fix the problem either. And I think that if we are really courageous and want to address the issues that contributed to the kind of abuse that we have seen in the past and may likely see in the future, then we have to go to the root of the problem. And I don't think
yeah, but you say it's not going to help
here or there.
Well, you say it's not going to help, but the victims have been begging for the church to take responsibility for this, and they want accountability. So they welcome Justin Welby's resignation, but they also say, look at what we've just heard just a minute ago from the former Bishop of Ely, now promoted to Bishop of Lincoln. They say that he should go too because he knew and didn't do enough.
I do understand that the survivors are saying nothing but a resignation will help us to feel that justice is done. I understand from their perspective what they are saying. What I am saying is, if we are truly seeking to have something different going forward, then we have to address the root of the problem. The other aspect of this for me,
how do you do
Archbishop
that? I mean,
Justin,
how do you reform that?
How we reform that, I think for me at the heart of this problem is the impoverished interpretation of scriptures that takes a kind of literalism when we look at biblical scriptures. That for me is part of the problem. And unless we courageously address that, we are likely in the future to still find that we have a problem with abuse by people who interpret the Bible literally and says, God has spoken to me and God wants me to do that. Or indeed to say we hold the confessional seal as the highest order and so we will not tell if somebody confesses something to us. That's at the heart of the problem.
But Bishop Rose, if the church is to have any hope of changing society in the way you describe and changing the interpretation of the Bible, surely it has to change itself first and look to its own sin, to use your terminology.
Absolutely. And that is what I'm saying. If we are really going to see any difference, it is not just simply going to come about because an archbishop resigns. We have to go to the root of the problem.
Just briefly, have you spoken to the Archbishop of Canterbury today? What is his frame of mind?
No, I have not spoken to him, but I can imagine the pain that he is feeling. Because in the past, this is the Archbishop who has done so much in terms of bringing the church to this point in taking safeguarding seriously. And so I can understand the sadness that he feels for those who have been abused. He is a decent man, and I believe that he feels pain and sadness for those who have been abused, and pain and sadness for a church that keeps a stranglehold, as it were, on scriptures in a way that is damaging to those who are most vulnerable in our society.
Bishop Rose Hudson-Wilkin, thank you very much for joining us. Well, Mark Stibbe was one of John Smyth's victims. He's a former vicar and now an author. He joins me now from Folkestone. Mark Stibbe, you heard Bishop Rose there saying that no amount of resignations will fix this problem. You called for Justin Welby's resignation last night. Do you feel that that's a good job done?
I think it's part of a good job done, Kathy. I think that he's done the right thing, and that's what we as survivors and as victims of John Smyth have been asking for right from the very beginning when you broke the story in 2017. We asked for the Archbishop of Canterbury, whom we knew about the abuses in 2013, and the Bishop of Ely and other senior figures in the Church of England to do the right thing. And Justin Welby has done the right thing. He's admitted that at a personal and at an institutional level, we have been failed. And other people can see that. Everyone can see that, including the Prime Minister, who said today that as victims we have been very badly failed. So I applaud Justin Welby for resigning, but what I think the survivor group would like is more resignations, because that means more accountability, people taking responsibility for having been silent when they should have spoken.
Well, so what did you make of the Bishop of Lincoln's response, which we just read out just a few minutes ago, former Bishop of Ely? Should he resign? He says he's sorry.
Well, I think he is one of the people that Keith Makin, in his forensic research and report, highlighted was very culpable. And so, I mean, obviously it's up to him and his relationship with God and his conscience. But as far as the survivor group is concerned, we want people to take responsibility for not just their actions, but their inaction. And if he's one of those people, then he should go. I think one of the things that we learned early on as a survivor group was the importance of what Matthew Syed calls black box thinking. When planes crash, the boxes are retrieved and the industry learns everything that it needs to from that crash and rolls out the changes necessary. I think the Church of England needs to engage in widespread black box thinking as a result of this chaotic mishandling of the Smyth abuses. And part of that must involve, I think, some resignations more than just Justin Welby's. Otherwise, he's taking the rap for everything, and it could be argued that he's being scapegoated.
So multiple resignations, root and branch reform sounds like what you're talking about. Should the police be called in to look at whether people were complicit in a cover-up?
I think that would be part of what Matthew Syed would call black box thinking, yes. If there are senior clergy who have broken the law, then they need to be called to account for that. But I think at a very sort of fundamental level, we're asking for two things. We're asking for resignations and we're asking for reform. And I would like to see those who have been responsible for silence with us, I would like to see them leave their post in the Church of England, and I'd like to see them replaced by people like Bishop Helen, who courageously spoke out yesterday and who clearly has a compassion for victims and a passion and an intentionality for proper safeguarding throughout the whole of the Church of England. We need to see local churches becoming safe spaces for vulnerable people, and for that to happen, not just resignation, but reformation right from the top.
Right. And, you know, Justin Welby said in his statement he wanted to meet the victims. I know that is something that, you know, many victims would have liked to have happened a long time ago. If you do go and meet him, you personally, what would you say to him?
Well, I would first of all say that I take no personal delight or joy in him losing his job. I'm not that kind of person, and none of the victims delights in that one simple fact that he's effectively lost his job. But we would also want to challenge him to be a person that makes sure that he uses the rest of his life for the cause of this reformation of the church, so it is a safe house for vulnerable people.
Mark Stibbe, thank you very much for joining us. Well, from women bishops to same-sex marriage, Justin Welby spent his 11 years as head of the Church of England brokering compromises between deeply divided factions in the Anglican Church. It's likely that the next Archbishop of Canterbury will have to deal with many of the same arguments. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, has been taking a look at Justin Welby's legacy and what might come next.
Happier times, Justin Welby arriving at Canterbury Cathedral for his enthronement.
Who are you, and why do you request entry?
I am Justin, a servant of Jesus Christ.
And so began more than a decade as a central figure in the British establishment.
As we stand, let us pray for Harry and Meghan. Few leaders receive the outpouring of love that we have seen. Amen.
But Justin Welby said he suffered imposter syndrome, forever troubled by the unconventional path that got him to this high place.
Even this morning, I was in my prayers saying to God, what am I doing here? I must be the worst archbishop there's been for many, many centuries.
After Eton, Justin Welby became an oil executive. He suspected, the first Archbishop of Canterbury to reach for the Financial Times first thing every morning.
Rather sadly, I enjoy reading about economics, and, I'm a sort of geek in that way, really. And I enjoy reading about economics, and my favourite paper... No, I better not say that here.
The church hoped in Justin Welby they'd found a manager and a conciliator who could overcome the deep divisions, especially on church blessings for same-sex union.
I'll leave a full minute.
Silence for reflection after last year's synod voted for a compromise, heavily restricted rules for church blessings.
And let's now turn to gay sex.
I do all the time, really, in the life of the church.
And do you have a better answer yet?
Yes, I do.
But his compromise disappointed both sides of the argument. In a deeply divided church, now stricken by a safeguarding scandal.
This is certainly the greatest crisis I can remember in my lifetime in the Church of England. And this must be a time when we pull together as leaders in the Church of England and get our act together on advice that we've been given externally again and again and again on how we become a survivor-centred, trauma-aware, safer church.
Nice to meet you, Justin.
In his moment of greatest need, few defended him. Some may have attacked Justin Welby in a proxy battle for other causes.
Do you think some of his critics, maybe from both ends of the argument over same-sex blessings, have weaponised this issue in the last few days? It lies behind some of the attacks.
I think it does, yes. There's deep unhappiness in the church across the board with Welby, and conspicuously very few people have come forward to defend him or to offer any sort of cover for him. It's like politics. Once people start drawing away from you or keeping quiet, you know you're on the slide.
He said a no-deal Brexit could bring economic chaos.
That raises a very serious moral question about whether no deal could be acceptable.
And he attacked the Rwanda deportation plan.
Subcontracting out our responsibilities, even to a country that seeks to do well, like Rwanda, is the opposite of the nature of God.
Just before the resignation was announced at the COP summit in Azerbaijan, Keir Starmer was asked if, in principle, figures in public life who don't act on warnings of criminality should face consequences.
Of what I know of the allegations, they're clearly horrific in relation to this particular case, both in their scale and their content.
Prime Ministers stopped meddling in the choice of Archbishop of Canterbury under Gordon Brown. The challenge falls to a divided Church of England, and it's a mighty one.
It will not be easy to find the next Archbishop of Canterbury. They're going to have an inbox which is absolutely enormous. So what is critical is the support that we put around that person. We're not going to find Superwoman or Superman flying in and saving the day here. That's not going to happen. The human being who can lead us out of this is not been born and is never going to be born. The question is, how do we share responsibility?
In recent times, the Church's machinery for appointing senior clergy has twice been deadlocked and failed to agree a name, a sign that the difficulties of the Church of England go even deeper than the safeguarding scandal that has brought down its leader.
The Reverend Dr. Stephen Cherry is Dean of Chapel at King's College, Cambridge, and joins us from there. Dr. Stephen Cherry, was Justin Welby right to quit, or was he, as some say, hounded out by his opponents in the church?
Good evening, Cathy. I think he was absolutely right to resign today. I rather wish he'd resigned when the report first came out. My own feelings about this were quite strong when I saw that interview with you last Thursday, and I thought that the Archbishop looked extremely uncomfortable and that he was right to have considered resigning then, and I'm very sorry that he was advised by others that this wouldn't be the best step to take.
Well, do you think other resignations should follow, as Mark Stibbe, one of Smyth's victims, just said, and given that so many bishops, for example, have been criticised in the Macon Review?
I'm not quick to make up my mind on this subject. I wasn't rapid to make up my mind with regard to where the Archbishop stood, but I actually think that there's a difference between the position of the Archbishop of Canterbury, because he has a very singular, particular representative role, and with so much concern about the quality of his decision-making, his pastoral judgment in the way in which he related to victim groups, it wasn't tenable for him to remain in that position. I think the question about other characters is more forensic and more particular, and I think they need to consider whether or not making a statement of what they've done and expressing sorrow is a sufficient statement to those who have been harmed. And I think it's very important with these apologies that are coming is the question, who are they aimed at? Who is going to receive the apology? It has to be the victims, and one has to monitor the way in which the victims respond. The victim's voice in this is much more important than voices like mine.
Well, of course, and the victims 7 years ago told me what was going on. Turned out the church had known for far longer than that. So these apologies now are rather late in the day, aren't they? And I mean, if you look at, for example, the Bishop of Lincoln, who was the Bishop of Ely, he got a report from a survivor that I spoke to in my piece tonight, Graham. Back in 2012, he got that report. And only now is he issuing this statement saying sorry. He should consider his position, shouldn't he?
Well, Cathy, I wanted to say in the course of this interview just to pay respect to the work that you've done, because this is extremely unpleasant work to be doing and engaging with, because I think you've taken very seriously the actual pain of real people, and I think that that's what is required of people in leadership in the church.
But, you know, Mark Stibbe talked about resignations and reformation. It sounds to me that you're saying, well, this is it now. Justin Welby's resigned. That's it. No one else needs to go. So what about reformation then? Should handling church abuse allegations be taken away from the bishops who really haven't shown themselves fit to handle it?
Yeah, I completely agree with that point, both the particular one with which you ended, that there must be an independent way of dealing with these matters, which doesn't end up in some way or other with the top being a bishop. It has to be independent. This would be true of any organisation. We can't have people marking their own homework and making their own decisions about their own performance in these kinds of areas. That absolutely needs to happen. I believe it will happen. I think it's not quite straightforward to know how it will happen, but I believe that will be a consequence. I also think the more general point about reformation is it's a big word to use, but I think it's absolutely the right word to use. We must remember that these problems that we're dealing with now, that have come to full light in the report that came out last week, are not just, they're not just an isolated individual, and it's not just one individual who hasn't coped well. These are systemic, deep problems that have developed over a long period of time. And when a church begins to recognise that something about its tradition isn't serving it, then it must begin to go into a process of radical change. And it isn't possible to say at the outset how that will wind up.
Dr. Stephen Cherry, thank you very much for joining us. Worth saying, the chapel behind you looks absolutely beautiful, so that is worth pointing out on this fairly grim night. For more on the Archbishop's resignation, you can head over to channel4.com streaming, where you can watch a background report and my extended interview with Justin Welby from last Thursday, as the pressure on him to resign was mounting. And if you've been affected by any of the issues raised in our reports, you can find a range of places to seek help on channel4.com/support.